muscle today, which is a super cool topic. I love this topic, especially as I'm getting a lot more interested in just this whole topic of longevity. We've been focusing on that, as if anyone has been with me on the past several months of webinars, lots of longevity and health span and what contributes to that. And muscle is just such a huge piece of that. For anyone interested, before I kick off, by the way, if I don't know you, my name is Megan. I'm the manager at the Wellness Center and I'm a registered dietitian. And if you're interested in some of my sources on all of this, because muscle is a really big topic, it can get a little weedy. I really like Peter Attia, Dr. Peter Attia, Attia, as well as Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, Lyon. Those two individuals are really big in longevity in general. Peter Attia really focuses on all longevity. Gabrielle Lyon is really a bit more hyper-focused on muscle and muscle's relation to longevity, but they have books, they have websites with just tons of free information on there, and both of them use excellent resources. So I usually start with them when I'm looking for to answer a question when it comes to muscle and longevity. And I kind of then branch out from there using some of their points and then seeing what they use as a resource and what they cite. And that's kind of my starting point, rather than just digging into the internet where sometimes you don't know who you're looking at and what they're if they have a lot of credibility. So those two are really good resources if you're someone who's really interested in this topic in particular. And that's where a lot of my information at least stems from today. So let's get a move on. So we're talking about building muscle, and if we're going to talk about how to do it, we have to kind of understand what it is first. So just a very brief muscle 101 is muscle is a twofold system. First of all, it's a tissue. It's a type of soft tissue in the body that's made up of a lot of cells, and essentially its main function is to relax and contract so that we can move. And there are over 600 muscles in the body that move. There's probably actually a little bit more than that. It can make up to 50% of our body's mass. It's a very critical tissue system within the body. However, it's also an organ. If you didn't know that, I think a lot of times people think of organs, just as our pancreas and our liver and our kidneys and our heart and our brain, and those are our organs. Well, muscle is actually an organ too, and it functions not only from the functional capacity of making us move, but there's also metabolic and endocrine outputs that I'm going to talk to you about here. So, sorry, my page froze. Hopefully it didn't freeze for you guys. Hopefully that changed. So the three different systems are functional. So muscle helps us with our posture, helps us with our strength, helps us with our balance, and reducing our fall risk, which is huge the older we get, because the older we get, pretty much after age 50, our risk of falling keeps on going up. And then our risk of having an injury with a fall keeps on going up significantly. So muscle helps to prevent that. Helps keep that strength so that we have what's called ADLs, activities of daily living. Think of lifting up your grocery bag and carrying it up steps. Think of walking your dog and having to, pull and push and pull and pull on the leash. It's not always just these weights in the weight room. It's really activities of daily living that are the important part of why we want muscle. Bones are also something that are supported by muscles. Sometimes we think of them as two separate things, but our muscles are connected to our bones. So if we have risk of osteoporosis, we also have risk of low muscle mass, and vice versa. We actually see a really high correlation amongst people who have what's called sarcopenia, which I'll talk about in a few slides, and that's lack of muscle, and their risk of osteoporosis. Because when we're contracting our muscle and doing resistance training, we're also putting weight on the bone. And then injury prevention in general. There's been some really interesting research on people who are admitted into the hospital, and their ability to recover and be discharged is significantly related to their muscle mass. So people with low muscle mass tend to be in the hospital with injury longer. It takes them longer to recover. Why might this be? It's because our muscle is where we store all of those amino acids that our body needs for injury prevention and for immune system recovery. It's kind of like a bank, if you will, of amino acids and hormones that help with our immune system. And so when we get sick or when we get injured, our body says, hey, muscle, can I use some of that? And it'll pull some of those amino acids out. That's why we lose calcium from our muscle and from our bones when we're in osteoporosis. So if we have only a little bit of muscle mass to spare, when we get injured, we don't have enough to then put toward the injury recovery. And then we are really significantly low when we do finally recover. So we really want to think about the functional benefits as not just gaining muscle and getting awesome biceps in a six pack. We want to think of it as our reserve that holds on to all the little things that we need for recovery and for balance and for strength throughout the day. So the thing that I think is really important about muscle and really interesting is that it is a metabolic and an endocrine organ, as I mentioned on the last slide. So it's a metabolic organ because it uses glucose and it helps us with glucose. So what's super cool is we often think just about blood sugar going into the cells when we think about things like diabetes, but blood sugar goes into the muscle. Actually, 75% of our glucose regulation is controlled by muscle and nothing else. That's because our muscle uses it to move around. It's our energy source. What's also really cool about muscle is it can bypass insulin. So if you have diabetes or you're familiar with diabetes or you're familiar with the concept of insulin resistance, you know that it can be really hard to control your blood sugar when you have any of these conditions. When you have insulin resistance, it's hard to control the blood sugar. But guess what? Muscle doesn't need insulin. It can suck up glucose without it. There's this separate pathway. So the more you contract your muscle, and I keep doing this because it's the only thing you can see. You don't always have to do bicep curls. But the more you contract your muscle, the more you tell your muscle to suck up blood sugar, and the more you can control your blood sugar independent of your insulin resistance. How cool is that? It's also the primary source of fat oxidation. So this is where our body breaks down fatty acids. So this helps us with our heart disease risk. It helps with our cholesterol and our triglycerides because we're breaking down fat into usable forms in the muscle. It happens in other organs too, but it happens a lot in the muscle. Energy regulation and our mitochondrial health. So our mitochondria are the little tiny parts of the cell that is our energy powerhouse. Okay. And I have a webinar on mitochondria from a couple of months ago if you want to go learn more about that. But essentially, that's where our metabolic rate comes from, how quickly we burn energy. So if our mitochondria is healthy, we burn energy faster and more efficiently, and we have lower risk of things like overweight, obesity, diabetes. So the more muscle we have, the healthier our mitochondria are, the lower risk we have of those things. And you can see this down here in this little chart I have for you, where you have on the bottom axis muscle mass percent, and then the vertical axis, your blood sugar and your A1C. And what they showed is the more muscle mass you have, the better all of those metabolic markers are. In fact, what this particular study showed is a 2 to 3% gain in muscle showed a 4% lower fat mass and a 4% drop in A1C. And if you are someone who's watching your A1C for prediabetes or diabetes, you know that 4% drop is significant. And it also showed a 5.8% drop in fasting glucose, just by gaining muscle, completely independent of weight. Okay, so some of these people in this study were overweight and or even obese, but a muscle gain showed these improvements. So cool. All right, the other benefit of muscle is your endocrine benefit. So endocrine means it's related to hormones, okay? The reason it's an endocrine organ is because it actually produces testosterone when you're doing resistance training. What does testosterone do? Amongst many, many other things, but related to this topic, testosterone helps create muscle protein synthesis. So there's a whole process of taking our amino acids and turning them into more muscle. That process is called muscle protein synthesis. There's a lot of pieces that play into that, but it's triggered. It starts with testosterone. So the second you release testosterone, your body says, I guess I got to go make some muscle, and it starts that process. We don't stimulate testosterone very well just totally on our own. There's other factors, and one of those factors is resistance training, stimulating the muscle contraction. Another endocrine benefit, so a hormone benefit, is mood hormones, endorphins, dopamine. These are all of our feel awesome, motivated hormones. And those are produced in part by muscle. The more muscle we have, the more feel-good hormones we produce. Serotonin is our happy hormone, our proud hormone. This is why when you go to the gym and you work out, you leave feeling awesome, right? You're just like, yeah, I did that. That's the feeling we get from those hormones from contracting our muscle. It suppresses a hormone called ghrelin, which is our hunger hormone. This is why when you work out at the gym, you usually are not starving right away. You usually get hungry a little later. But right when you leave the gym, you're typically not feeling super hungry right that minute because the contraction of the muscle dampened our hunger hormone. It also triggers a really amazing growth hormone called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And what this cool little hormone does is it goes up to the brain and it says, let's make some neurons. Let's make some synapses between neurons. The more BDNF we have, the less risk of Alzheimer's, of neurodegeneration, of depression, of anxiety we have. So BDNF is good for our brain. And then finally, it releases hormones called myokines. Myokines are directly related to our immune function and our inflammatory response. All of this is happening in the muscle. So again, think of that muscle as a reserve, as a bank. The more muscle you have, the more of all these benefits you're going to get. The more spike in mood hormones you're going to get. The more BDNF you're going to get. Okay? So now that I've drawn you in, I feel like hopefully you're like, yeah, let's gain some muscle. Let's talk about muscle in the concept of longevity. A lot of people are starting to talk about muscle is our longevity organ. It's the one that's most related to living longer and living healthier. And if you were in on my webinar last month, we talked about this concept of health span. Instead of just lifespan and how long we're living, we want to think about how healthy we are for that length of time. We want to be without chronic disease and able to do those activities of daily living. So now there's a new term called muscle span as well. And because it's so tightly related to that health span concept of the more muscle you have, the healthier you are, the even later in life, during the end of our lifespan. So the two pieces of this are sarcopenia and dynapenia. You've probably heard of sarcopenia, at least heard the term. And what that is your loss of muscle mass. It starts early, guys. It starts at age 30. That's when we start losing muscle mass. We start losing about 1% of our muscle mass every year, starting at age 30. That's the natural decline of the human body. But it doesn't have to be more than that if you're stimulating muscle, if you're creating more muscle mass. It'll just kind of slowly trickle down 0.5 to 1% a year, not much. It's where we get more than that we get risk of sarcopenia. So for people over age 50, sarcopenia impacts about 23%. Once we hit age 65, that goes up to 45% of adults are impacted by sarcopenia. And again, this is because we're not building the muscle early on. So then we have a fall. We get hit by a really bad flu, and we're just depleting that muscle that was not built really high up to begin with. So sarcopenia is linked to frailty, disability, and low quality of life. That's what QL stands for. Dynapenia, this is one I had not heard before I started getting into the research on this, really just last year. That is the loss of strength and power, independent of muscle. So this is where you might know people like this who are maybe in the gym, they're building muscle, they have awesome biceps, but they don't really move that much. They just kind of like walk around like this, like your bodybuilders, they're not actually able to do much with that muscle. They might have a lot of muscle, they might not have a lot of strength and power. So you not only have to have the muscle, but you also have to use your muscle. And if you have dynapenia, that's not only related to the frailty and the disability, but that's actually related to mortality. So that impacts less, only about 19% of adults, but that's still a hefty amount. So the moral of the story here is we want to be building muscle and be using our muscle to the maximum capacity. The earlier we start, the better. And then here are just some interesting stats. And 1 in 3 adults over age 60 fall every year. It's actually the #1 cause of hospital admissions for adults. 1/4 of these falls result in fracture because we have weak bones and weak muscle supporting those bones. 50% of those who fall with fracture, with low muscle to begin with, never recover their ability. That doesn't mean you pass away. Never recover means that we're not recovering your previous physical ability, because we just didn't have the ability to pull in those amino acids in the immune recovery. So this little graph here shows you the peak of muscle and strength gain, and then how it tends to taper off over life. But that's a really big span of tapering off, that if you're working toward building muscle, you can be at the top of that. And that's what we want, or even higher for some people. So just to kind of break it down by age, and I don't mean for this to be a depressing slide, but I think it's good for us to know what we're up against depending on our age category. So if we're in our 30s and 40s, that's where your muscle loss starts. If you are inactive, you will lose about 1% of muscle every year. If you're not inactive, that doesn't have to be you. That doesn't have to be your stat. And we'll start to lose 2 to 3% of our strength every year. Again, if we're inactive. Muscle starts to become less responsive to protein, just kind of over time. We need higher quality protein just because our digestive systems aren't working the same way. And our weight accumulation, the older we get, the more we tend to accumulate weight, tends to start adding to metabolic risk. Then we hit our 50s and we're starting to lose a little bit more muscle per year. Again, if inactive, if we're not working toward building it. Muscle begins accumulating some fat inside of the muscle, and that can actually lead to some risk of everything from significant injury to heart disease. And then we start to have hormone imbalances. This is where women might be hitting menopause. Men start to produce less testosterone just naturally, which leads to more visceral fat, more bone loss, more risk of injury, and just it's a little bit harder to build the muscle. Not impossible, just a little bit harder. And then when we're 60 plus, that's where all these risks of falls, inactivity, and malnutrition come in, especially if we don't have a higher muscle to begin with. Okay, we also have more metabolic factors. So starting as early as you can, and if you're on this webinar and you're 70 years old and you're like, great, I'm over in that far right category, it does not mean you can't build muscle now. Everyone can build muscle at every single age. It's just kind of knowing you have a bit more stacked up against you. You're going to have to work a little harder and you're going to have to eat a little smarter. All right, Megan, let's move on and tell us how to do it then. We get it? There's good news. Everyone can build muscle. So there's 2 things you got to do to build muscle. 1 is work out and 2 is eat smart. Okay, because muscle responds to 2 things. Contraction and protein levels in your system. 2 things. So let's talk about contraction first and resistance training. Resistance training means you are exercising against a force. Okay, so this is running doesn't count. Walking doesn't count. We'll talk about those things in a little bit, but that's cardio. Resistance training means you are using a force. Now, this can mean hand weights. This can mean bands. This can be machines. This can be body weight. Doing a push-up against a countertop is force. That is actually resistance training. Now, you might not gain as much muscle as the person who's doing a push-up on the ground using a strong band, but you're still resistance training. Okay, resistance training is very personal and very relative to each individual person. You all have to start somewhere. You have to start where it's safe and where your body is going to trigger that muscle protein synthesis. So on this little chart here, these are the different variations. First, you start with form. Always, always, always start with appropriate form. If you have a really bad form squat and you start adding heavy weight to that bad form squat, you're going to get injured. And then you're not going to be able to work out for 6 months because you're injured and you didn't have high protein to begin with. So I know it can be sometimes frustrating when we're like, oh, I just really want to start building some muscle and all I'm doing here is a body weight squat. But know that if you're starting from ground zero, body weight works. You will gain muscle with body weight. So start with form, get your form impeccable first. Then you start working toward endurance training. Endurance training means it's a light weight with more reps. So this is where we're looking at maybe 3 sets of 15 to 20. So if we're doing a bicep curl, you're maybe holding 3 pounds and you're doing 15 to 20 of those 3 pounds and you take a rest and you do it again. Okay, so that's endurance training. Lightweight, lots of reps until you're tired. Then you can kind of move on to what's called hypertrophy training. That's a little bit heavier with less reps. So that's where we're somewhere in the 6 to 12 rep range. This is where most people gain the most muscle the most efficiently. So again, we'll just use the bicep curl because you can see me. But that's if I was doing endurance training with 3 weights, that might mean for me, I'm looking at a 10 to 15 pounds in each hand, and where it's really tough to do them, but I can maybe get to maybe 10, and maybe I do 3 sets of that. That's hypertrophy training, where that last set or the last rep, you're kind of like, ooh, I'm maybe not going to make it. That's what they call almost failure. When you just barely can do that last one, that's almost failure. That's where true muscle building is created. You can get there with endurance. It just takes a whole lot more reps to get there versus a slightly heavier weight. So again, this is going to be individual and personal to everyone. My hypertrophy bicep curl weight is going to be very different than Deb's. Okay, it's going to be very different than Cindy's. We're going to grab different hand weights, and each of us is going to start at a different point that makes us go, whoa. For some people who just start, that's a 5-pound weight that, yikes, I'm getting to failure after 6. For me, personally, I just got myself to a 15-pound weight, and this after a year and a half of training. Some people, just big buff gym dudes, can do that same curl with 30-pound weights. So know that it's very personal. And then the strength training at the top end, this is for people who are very experienced in the gym, doing the heaviest weight possible for 1 to 3 reps. So this is like your body weight training people you're seeing, like even doing competitions where they would be putting one over their bar and doing like 1 to 2 to 3, just super heavy. And that's more strength than muscle building. So I would guess everyone in this webinar is somewhere between a 0 and a 6 on that scale, depending on how long you've been exercising or trying resistance training. But know that no matter where you are, you want a minimum of 2 sessions a week. That's your absolute minimum for gaining muscle. If you're only doing 1 resistance training session a week, I'm sorry, but you're not gaining muscle. 2's pushing it. Truly, for people that I see, and especially when they're eating really well with protein, it's more like 3 that you're going to see significant muscle gains over, a 12 to 14 week period. That's usually how long it takes, by the way. You're not going to gain a whole lot of muscle weight in 4 weeks. It just won't happen. It takes some time. So every week, consistently, 2 to 4 resistance training sessions, and you want to hit all of your muscle groups. And again, you want to try and get close to that. I probably can't do 1 more. So if you're doing squats, I probably maybe could do 1 more. That's where you stop, you rest, and then you do it again. And this is for people who are interested. You also ideally want to rotate through formats. You want to be doing things where you're working on your grip strength, like hangs or farmer's carry, where you're holding weights by your side and walking, or even squeezing handles on machines that you're pulling. A push-pull is a really important movement for just activities of daily living, pushing a grocery cart. So that's where the row machine comes into play, or a chest press, or an overhead press. Hip hinges are also really important. Getting on and off the toilet is a hip hinge. So that's why lunges and squats and deadlifts are important. Please work with a trainer. Okay, so I'm giving you some of these key basics, and some of you are already very literate when it comes to resistance training. But if this is all kind of a different language to you and you're like, what is she talking about? Work with a trainer and just try and get a minimum of 2 sessions a week where you are focused on strength and muscle. Get yourself to 3 or 4 if you really want to build muscle. Okay, and the reason we want to rotate through formats is back to that activities of daily living thing. If all you're doing is ever push-pull movements and you're never doing hip hinges, well, then we're not creating muscle or strength in the lower part of the body. So that's going to make lower body movements throughout the day more difficult. And just to kind of get you to think outside the box a little bit, and to encourage you too, because I think when we have previous injuries or limited mobility, sometimes we get a little bit frustrated that, we can't quite do heavy lifting, or we can't do the resistance training we would like to be able to do. There are other things you can do. So there's something called a vibration plate. We have one here at the Wellness Center. We actually have 2. And you stand on them and they vibrate like crazy. If you've ever done it here at the Wellness Center, it almost makes you motion sick to go on the higher levels. And that type of vibration activates tons of muscle fibers. It actually, according to the Power Plate statistics, activates 135% more muscle fibers than a typical resistance training exercise. So this isn't going to make you gain a lot of muscle because there's not a lot of resistance going on. But what it does do is it triggers the muscle activation. So you're getting that hormone and that endocrine and the metabolic benefits, even if you're not gaining a ton of muscle. So it's a great place to start if you're a little bit worried about resistance training or you have mobility concerns. It also increases your blood circulation, so we're getting cardiovascular there. Great if maybe you had a surgery and you're not able to walk or do a whole heck of a lot right now, you could at least stand or sit on a vibration plate. And it only takes a couple of minutes, like 5 minutes of standing or sitting or putting your legs on it to get some of that muscle activation. It could be just a great place to get yourself into the gym, get some benefits if resistance training isn't quite in the cards for you yet. So just kind of to summarize all of that, the picture here shows you all those different benefits of resistance training because you're getting the benefits the second you do a contraction, whether that contraction is a body weight or a 3-pound weight or a 20-pound weight or a standing on the vibration plate. All of those hormonal and endocrine benefits are happening almost immediately. That's what's so cool about resistance training. You're getting those benefits right away. Even if you're not gaining the muscle right away, you're getting all those hormone and metabolic benefits right away. And usually those benefits last for anywhere from 2 hours to 2 days. So some of that glucose uptake lasts for 2 days after you've done a resistance training exercise. And if you're feeling a little depressed by some of my other slides where I was like, well, when you're older, it's harder, just know there's been a lot of research on older adults that have been super successful with gaining muscle. So these are just 2 of them that I put in little asterisks. There was this one was gigantic. I think there was like 2,000 people across the United States that were put on resistance training programs on anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks. They were all 70 to 80 years old with a variety of different mobility concerns because it was all over the United States. But they had to be in that decade of life, and all of them on a twice weekly resistance program gained an average of 3% increase in their muscle mass over just 8 to 12 weeks. That's awesome. That's so great. That's just twice a week. There was also a research study done in resistance training programs in senior living communities, and it was, again, a twice a week consistent. And what they did was they showed a group of younger people in their 20s and 30s compared to anyone over the age 65 in a senior living community on the same twice weekly resistance training program. And while the younger people gained more muscle than the older people, the preservation of muscle was exactly the same. So those in the senior living communities either stayed the same or gained in muscle mass. No one lost muscle mass. So at the very minimum, you're preventing degeneration of the muscle, likely gaining muscle at any age. So I do want to just quickly touch base on the concept of cardio because that's usually the one that tends to be the easiest for most people. I talk to a lot of people at all ages who are like, oh yeah, I go on my daily walk. I see a lot of people in the gym that are doing the bikes or the treadmill, and it's important, okay? The American College of Sports Medicine recommends 150 minutes per week of cardiovascular exercise. And very few people even meet this. Only 75% of adults meet this. So this is your 30 minutes a day of cardio work. It's super important for your heart. It's very important for weight management. The older we get, the more cardio we need for our weight management. But for your contraction, your load, and your muscle protein synthesis, that's MPS, muscle protein synthesis, cardio doesn't cut it. You will not gain muscle by going for daily walks. You will not gain muscle by getting on the bike. Okay, so it's important. I'm not telling you to not do your cardio, but it's critical for protecting our bodies of sarcopenia and dynapenia and that whole injury prevention spectrum that we do gain muscle and that we aren't only focused on our cardio. What's kind of cool is there's things like rucksacks now. It's essentially just a backpack with weights in it with this fancy name. But rucksacking is something you can do if you love your walks and you're having trouble finding time to do walks and resistance training. Throw on a rucksack, a weighted backpack, or a weighted vest. Now we're putting resistance on the muscles of the leg. So it's more lower body than upper body, but at least we're starting somewhere. We're getting resistance, we're gaining muscle on our walks. Okay, so our goal is 2 days minimum of resistance training with our cardio. And if you can add resistance to your cardio, awesome. Hand weights, like ones that go on your wrist, or ankle weights, those can do it too. If you're going for a jog on the elliptical and you want to put hand weights and ankle weights on, it's a little something. All right, so muscles respond to contraction. So we talked about resistance training, but they also respond to protein. The older we get, the less hormones we produce, the more we need to rely on protein to stimulate that MPS, muscle protein synthesis. Okay, so I'm not saying that we don't respond to hormones, but just the older we get, when we have imbalances in those natural hormones, the more we really need to focus on protein quality. All right. This is where numbers, people tend to get in their heads on the numbers. So I'm putting this out there for you. I will send out the slides to everyone, because I know this is something that everyone always asks about, so that you know the calculation, but don't get too tied up in it either. So your protein goals, to avoid deficiency, if you Google what should my protein intake be, you'll see the United States USDA recommendation is 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. So 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. That will help you avoid deficiency. Okay, you won't be deficient. Does that mean you're going to maximize your muscle mass? Absolutely not. No one over the age of 50 is going to maximize muscle mass with only 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. That's been shown pretty successfully. So United States recommendations are to prevent you from being deficient and being completely sarcopenic. But if we want to really build muscle and we're going to start resistance training, we're going to need more than that, and we need more the older we get. So to really maximize muscle, that calculation should be 1.2 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day. If you are only living in the world of pounds and you don't know how to do kilograms, you take your pounds and divide it by 2.2 to get your kilograms. That's a lot of calculation. And if you don't have your calculator in front of you, your mind might be spinning. So a really good guideline is 1 gram per pound of lean mass per day. That's one that seems to be easier for people to remember. If you don't know your lean mass, you got to come into the wellness center and get an InBody. Okay, because their lean mass is really the best predictor. That we want to feed your lean mass. We don't want to feed your fat mass. So ideally, we know your lean mass amount, which is usually 20 to 30% less than your total body weight. And your general guideline is 1 gram per pound of lean mass a day. For general purposes, for most people, I'm telling them try and get 100 grams per day of protein. For many people, it's more than that. And the more resistance training you do, the more you should get. Most people I talk to are eating around 70 grams a day. And I want most people to be eating around 100 at a minimum. So if that gives you a general range, if you don't want to do the calculations, aim for 100 grams a day. And then try and find out your lean mass so you can do the true calculation. Some other key points about protein. The daily distribution is more important than the timing. So I know a lot of people, especially if they're not hungry in the morning, they'll just kind of ram their lunch full of protein and try and meet their daily needs at just a lunch and a snack. You really do need to distribute it throughout the day. Your body can only handle so much protein at a time. So ideally, every meal is somewhere in the range of 30 to 50 grams of protein per meal. Okay. Up here in the top right, you see some examples of plant protein versus animal protein. Please do not understand me as saying you have to eat animal protein only and not plant protein. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that animal protein has the most amino acids, and it is the most efficiently absorbed and used by the body. Okay, it's the highest quality protein versus plant. So if we look at 3 ounces of steak, 25 grams of protein versus 3 cups of quinoa is 25 grams of protein. Okay, that's like no one's eating 3 cups of quinoa. 6.5 tablespoons of peanut butter gives you that same amount of protein. 1 2/3 cup of black beans, or 1 1/3 cup of edamame. So again, this doesn't mean you can't eat the plant proteins on the right. You just have to be very aware that you are getting less protein per bite and less efficient an effective protein per bite when it comes to plant proteins. So if you want to be really plant focused, if your diet is strictly vegan, you likely need more protein than someone else. You're going to need to be in the higher range of that equation. Or if you're leaning on the, maybe aiming for 100 grams per day idea, if you're strictly vegan, add 10 to 20 more grams to that because you just need more because your protein sources are less efficient. Okay. If you are having trouble gaining muscle, if you're doing all the things, you're like, I'm going to the gym, I have a trainer, I'm doing resistance training 4 days a week, I'm eating 115 grams of protein every day, and you're only gaining like 1 or 2 pounds of muscle, you might need a little bit more just protein. Sometimes when we're eating a steak or eggs or beans, it's tied up in other nutrients, so we might not be absorbing it as well. So you might want to try like just a 20-gram protein isolate shake after your resistance training exercise. I don't recommend doing that right off the bat. Most people just need to increase their daily protein, but some people have trouble even when they've done all the right things and checked off the boxes, and you might need another protein shake after you exercise. We talked about following a strict plant-based diet. Essential amino acids, there's 3 of them. These are 3 really special amino acids that do special things with the muscle. There's one called leucine. It's only found in animals. So if you are, again, following a vegan diet, you probably want to take either a protein supplement or even a leucine supplement. Some people might find branched chain amino acid supplements. Even if you're willing to have like a plant-based protein powder, that would do it. You'd get your leucine that way. And then just a note on if you're eating less calories for weight loss, a greater percentage of your calories should be put toward protein than anything else. So if you're reducing calories in, don't take that away from protein intake. Take it away from carbs and fat. Okay, so I'm going to show you some pictures of protein, but this is kind of our general overview of protein is so important and most people are not eating enough. Okay, so here's some examples of portion sizes to get these different amounts. So 30-gram portion of protein for fish is about 5 ounces. 4 ounces for meat. About 1 cup if it's ground meat, or 1 cup egg whites. Any of these will give you approximately 30 grams of protein. So if you have 5 ounces of smoked salmon at breakfast, and you have 4 ounces of chicken at lunch, and you have a cup of ground turkey at dinner, you're at 90 right there. So then if we also put some beans into that ground meat for a taco and maybe for a snack, we had a hard-boiled egg, we're getting to the 100, okay, or protein powder, things like that. 20-gram sources is one cup of Greek yogurt or about 3/4 cup of cottage cheese, 1 cup of edamame, 1 serving of protein powder, independent of source, whether it's whey or collagen. Usually protein powder is about 20 grams per serving. Some different brands are slightly vary. These are ones that I love to throw into stuff. So if I'm making oatmeal, like overnight oats, I might make that overnight oats with Greek yogurt in addition to just the normal liquid so that I'm upping my protein a bit more. I like to make dressings or sauces out of Greek yogurt or cottage cheese because that way I'm just adding that little bit more protein to anything I'm eating. 15-gram sources, 4 tablespoons of nuts or seeds. So this is where maybe you're only having 3 ounces of chicken on a salad, but you want to put 2 tablespoons of hemp seed or flaxseed or sunflower seeds on that salad. We're going to make that equal 30 grams total for the meal. A half a block of tofu is 15 grams. 3/4 cup of beans or lentils is 15 grams. 1.5 cups of milk or 2 string cheeses, and so on and so forth. So you could have 1 string cheese and it's about 8 grams of protein. 1 egg is about 8 grams. So obviously there's other food sources than this, but just to give you a visual. These are some of my favorite super quick protein ideas. My 2 favorite protein powders, and again, there are so many out there. This does not mean these are the only 2 good ones. Just everybody always asks me, what do I eat? So these are the 2 protein powders that are in my kitchen, are Just Ingredients. I really like their protein powder because it's a combination of whey and collagen, and they use monk fruit stevia as their sweetener. And they have all kinds of flavors. And then Vital Proteins is just collagen, and they're unflavored, tastes like nothing. So it's great to add to things like coffee if you just want another source of protein, which is what I do a lot of times. For instance, for breakfast, if I need a fast meal and I'm just grabbing 2 hard-boiled eggs, well, that's only about 15 to 16 grams of protein in my 2 eggs, and we need about 30, right? Remember, 30 grams per meal. So I might add collagen to a cup of coffee. Out the door I go with my collagen powder and my coffee and my 2 hard-boiled eggs, and I've met my protein needs. Again, cottage cheese, the Chobani Zero Sugars are dessert. So if you have a sweet tooth, but you're trying to increase your protein, go grab those. They are so yummy. That they taste like dessert. They actually don't, you don't get a blood sugar spike. This brand, Primal Bakery, I've found them so far at Sprouts and at Whole Foods and Mother's, and they have bread and they have wraps, and they make them out of a bunch of different types of nuts and seeds and nut flours to where they're actually a full serving of protein per item. So if you're a sandwich kind of person, or maybe you don't eat a lot of meat and you are looking for a plant-based source of protein, that could be a great one. Some other snacky things, Quest and Wisps are both kind of chippy, crackery type things where they use either cheese or lentil powder to add a little bit of protein. It's not huge, like we're talking 4 or 5 grams of protein in those Quest chips, but it's better than a regular chip. So if you're going to eat chips anyway and you're having trouble meeting your protein needs, there's a little bit more. Crunchy chickpeas, meat, like meat sticks, cheese, and then those little egg white bites are from Starbucks. So if you're on the run, when you go to Starbucks, look for these little egg bites. You get a good amount of protein there. All right, this is another overwhelming slide, but again, people ask me, so just take it when you have some time, apply your own, body weight and things to it. But we also need other nutrients, right? It's not just protein. We also need carbohydrates to fuel our exercise. We also need fat to fuel the cells. So these are our general guidelines for those. Our macronutrient goals are 90 to 130 grams of carb per day. And this is going to vary. If you're in strict weight loss mode, you're probably looking at more like 90 grams of carb a day. If you are really active and not trying to lose weight, 130 grams of carb a day. 25 grams of fiber is essential as a minimum, the more the better. And your fat, what I usually do is calculate my protein needs, calculate my carb needs, and then I take my total calories and I subtract all that, and that's what is left for fat. Otherwise, you could also do this calculation here with your own weight. In general, 30 grams a day of fat is a good minimum to start with. But you do need fat for muscle building, not a ton, but we need monounsaturated, meaning our olives and avocados, nuts and seeds, and omega-3s like fish. Those are all directly related to our muscles' ability to function. Micronutrients, these are our vitamins and minerals. The ones that we know have roles in the muscle building process are calcium, zinc, selenium, vitamin D3, vitamin C, and the B vitamins. If you are eating a lot of different types of plants and several different types of protein, you're likely eating these. This is not to say that you need to supplement any of these, but if you have a very particular diet, if you have a lot of restrictions in your diet for allergies or gut issues, if you're having trouble gaining muscle, you're already in slight sarcopenia, we might want to look at these types of micronutrients. Do you have enough? Maybe we run a panel. Maybe we do supplement. These are the ones I would look at first. Some other considerations just in general is when you're eating your meals, start with your fiber so that you start triggering your digestion. Then you eat your protein. Then you finish with carb if you're still hungry, because we want to make sure we don't fill up before we get to the protein. And protein, believe it or not, does trigger some blood sugar release. So most people don't need as much carbs as we think we need, as long as we're eating enough protein. And then just a trick I heard someone say one time that I thought was such a good idea is if you're going to a party or somewhere where you're afraid of overeating, have 20 grams of protein before you go, even if that's just a protein shake. It helps fill you up. It also helps make sure that you meet those protein needs if you get to the party and all they have is chips and crackers. Okay. And then a few notes on supplements. This is Very individual, always the caveat with supplements of working with someone who knows you, because if you're on meds, they could interact. Not everyone needs all supplements. But when it comes to muscle mass, these are the ones that show some benefit. Creatine. Creatine is involved in the process of producing energy in the muscle. So if you take creatine and you're just taking it, like it's really big right now. Some of you may have heard of creatine powder. If all you do is take creatine, but you're not doing resistance training, it's not going to do anything. Creatine triggers the energy production in the muscles so that you can work out harder and longer and stronger and build more muscle that way. So creatine is related to increased bone and muscle mass, but only if it's taken with resistance training. So 5 grams a day, it comes in powder, it doesn't taste like anything. You just pour it in your water. Definitely vitamin D3 for your muscle metabolism. If you're not eating 3 servings a week of fatty fish, you should be supplementing with D3 and omega-3s. That's just the way it is. So D3, 1000 IU per day, and omega-3s, 1500 milligrams per day. Both are significantly really related to muscle mass. When they're low, we tend to see low muscle. And then BCAA is branched chain amino acids. I don't really recommend these unless you're not meeting your protein needs or if you're on a vegan diet, because they're probably hard to get in that way. But if you're having some animal protein throughout the week and you're pretty much meeting your protein needs, you likely don't need this. So just some examples of a day in the life. These are 3 different ones. Honestly, all I did was just kind of Google. I Googled 100 gram of protein day, 120 gram of protein day, just to see, because there's Instagram influencers all over the place that give great ideas. And I thought these were good. So the one on the left is 120 grams of protein total for your day. 1 cup of Greek yogurt with berries and some granola for breakfast. 2 hard-boiled eggs with grapes for a snack. A chicken wrap, even better if that wrap was made of protein, we'd even get that number higher. A side salad with an apple, and fish tacos with black beans. Okay, so that was 120 days. So it's not as unreachable as you think. I think that's a pretty realistic day. That next one, fall flavors, that shows a smoothie for breakfast, making sure that you're getting a true amount of protein in your protein powder. Tuna for a snack. A harvest bowl that has chicken, I believe, in that one. That's how that got to 33 grams. Dinner of chicken tacos and a snack of some grapes and a string cheese. And then this over here on the right shows 30 gram of protein ideas. And I like some of these because it shows you how you can combine stuff. So that middle picture is a scoop of protein powder mixed with almond butter. Because we know that almond butter isn't a whole heck of a lot of protein, but if we mix it with some protein powder, now we have a protein spread, and it's still just a snack. Same thing with the first picture there is Greek yogurt mixed with cocoa powder and peanut butter. So we're kind of combining these flavors that we like with higher protein sources. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about rest with muscle building. Yes, the contraction and the protein, the resistance training, and the intake are super critical. But if all we're doing is working hard and eating hard and we're not resting, there's no time for all of that work to come together and synthesize. Rest is critical, not only between your exercise sets, so 1 to 3 minutes between sets, because you have to bring your energy level back up to do another hard set, but also between training sessions. You ideally want 1 or 2 days in between resistance training. We're not resistance training every single day. That won't do anything but break down your muscle. There's no recovery there, because what we do in resistance training is we're breaking the muscle apart. It has to come back together with the protein that we ate, and that will only happen if we're resting. Also, those growth hormones, all of those awesome things that happen from the endocrine perspective, they do their work the most during sleep. So if we're not sleeping well and we're not meeting our sleep needs, we're not getting a lot of those endocrine benefits, really. There's actually been some research that showed sleep disorders are strongly correlated with muscle loss, which is what this little graphic shows you here. These were people who were trying to lose weight. So they were on a weight loss plan, same exact weight loss plan, same exercise plan, same calories, same amount of protein, but one group slept only an average of 5.5 hours a night, and one group slept an average of 8.5 hours a night. The group that slept less lost weight, but lost more muscle and less fat. And the group that slept the most also lost weight, but lost more fat and preserved muscle. So the rest and the sleep is very important. 7 to 9 hours a night of quality sleep. If you want to know what quality sleep is, go toward one of my other webinars because I can talk forever on that. So your takeaways for today before I head over to your questions are four main things for muscle mass and strength building. One is resistance training. You won't gain muscle. All you're doing is walking on the treadmill and eating protein and taking creatine. You have to do resistance training. You have to lift weights or push against gravity 2 to 4 days a week, and you have to find the program that works for you. Not every exercise is going to work for every person. For instance, I can't do lunges. I have a knee issue. So I absolutely cannot do lunges for my knee. So I have to find other ways to work my lower body. Protein. You can do all the resistance training you want. If you're not eating the right amount of protein, you will not be able to rebuild the muscle you just broke down. 30 grams per meal, 1 gram per pound lean mass per day. Those are the general, I know I gave you that whole slide of different equations, but this is in general what you should remember. And we must rest between sets, between sessions, and allow ourselves to sleep at night. And I hadn't talked about this piece, but the consistency is also really key. Every research study I talked to you about today that showed these amazing benefits of resistance training, even as we get a lot older, even as people who are in their 80s who are gaining 3 pounds of muscle in a 12-week program, it's because they did it consistently. Can't do resistance training this week and take 3 weeks off. It just doesn't work that way. You'll lose muscle mass even just from 1 7-day stint of bed rest. We have to keep it up. So this is why you need to find a program that works for you. If you hate it, you're not going to do it. So be consistent. And I love this graphic because most people think consistent means you're doing the same thing all the time. And it really means you're finding an average. Some weeks you might be training 2 days a week. Some weeks it might be 4. Some weeks might be more upper body heavy. Some weeks might be more lower. Some days you're going to get 90 grams of protein. Other days you're going to get 140. But try and be in the consistent range regularly. Okay. So with that, before I get to your questions, just a preview of what's happening at the Wellness Center. We have Lynn, our other dietitian, does dietitian approved mini classes where she picks a topic and she looks at labels and samples of that topic. So I think last time she did bread, so it's just breads. Next time, I can't remember what our next session is, but they're always fun. A lot of times they're sold out because they're free. So the next one's on the 9th, that's tomorrow. And then we have a myofascial level 1 coming up. It's more educational, but it's all about how to stretch and posture, which all has to do with muscle. That's $25 on this Saturday. I'm teaching Nutrition 101 in August. That's always free. And then we do have a strength and muscle Q&A coming up where I'll be interviewing our strength trainer, Eric. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask a strength trainer, just email me and I will add that to our Q&A recording that will go out probably at the end of the month. Okay, I'm going to pull up our chat. Woo, we have questions. Okay. Let me see here. Sip of water. I'm going to answer all your questions. I heard taking calcium supplements. By the way, if anyone has to go, this is being recorded. It will be posted on the website within a day or two. So I'll keep recording while I answer questions. I heard taking calcium supplements increases risk of stroke and heart attacks. My doctor told me to supplement daily with calcium carbonate because of osteoporosis. Should I stop because of the risks? I eat kale, beans. I don't want to overdo calcium. So this is very individual. There have been studies that showed excessive calcium leads to calcification. I can't think of the term, but it's calcification in the arteries and in your whole blood system, which are hard. So that essentially looks like plaque, but it's very individual. Most people that have just general healthy metabolism do not need to worry about that. If the only health concern you have is osteoporosis, you do want calcium. However, calcium and vitamin D are best friends. Vitamin D makes sure that calcium gets absorbed and used best. So if you're only taking calcium, you are at higher risk of calcification versus if you take it with vitamin D, they're going to do their job together. So work with your doctor, ask them how much vitamin D you should be taking based on your recommended calcium amount, but that is the recommendation for osteoporosis. So I would still touch base with them. Having a trainer is worth the price of gold, form and no injury. Yeah, I completely agree. I've worked with a trainer so many times. My recommendation is to come back to your trainer. Use a trainer for 3 months, 6 months, depending on where you are in your fitness training ability. Take some time off, follow your program that you learned from the trainer, and in a year, come back again. Because more than likely you need to improve that plan. You've gotten stronger, you've gotten better. So you need to do some different things with different weights and do it in a safe way. So that's always my recommendation, is just because you've had a trainer in the past doesn't mean you don't need one again. I try and do some personal training sessions once a year. Like I'll buy a pack and then be on my way. Yes, and no injuries. What percentage of the total body is muscle? So it depends on who you are, how much muscle you have, but it's 30 to 50% of your total body mass is usually muscle, give or take. So again, depends on how much muscle you have. If you're obese, is that not your personal rucksack? Yeah, I mean, technically, if you have excess fat mass, you are putting more resistance on your bones and on your muscles. So that is a valuable question. It would be even more to put a rucksack on. Because if you think about it, it's your own baseline. If you're thinking of it from a perspective of body mass that's on your body's used to that. You move around every day with that amount of mass. So in order to stimulate more muscle building, more bone restructuring, you need more. You need more than your baseline, so that you would still want a rucksack. You would still want to do weight training. How much protein is in one egg? 7 to 8 grams in one egg. What 20-gram protein shakes do you recommend? I make my own. I have yet to find a pre-made protein shake that I really love the ingredients and that I approve of. If I need something super fast and I just gotta grab one, there's a brand called Koia, Koia. It's at most grocery stores. I like their brand, or I like their ingredients. It's only 18 to 20. Yeah, depending on the flavor, it's 18 to 20 grams of protein. It's not my favorite. I still would prefer to make my own with a protein powder, but that's probably my favorite pre-made shake. Also the one at Costco, there's two of them. One is, it's just Kirkland? I can't remember now, but it says like protein in red across the container. That one's not bad. Again, not my favorite, but if you just need something fast, those would be my two go-tos. Orgain has another one too, but I think it's only 15 grams, but still something. Can you recommend a creatine brand to supplement strength training? There's several. Just Ingredients, the same brand that I showed for protein powder, they have a creatine. The creatine I use is from a brand called Naked, and it comes in a really big container, and their whole MO as a brand company is that they don't use anything outside of their ingredient list. So I really like them. Those are the two that I know for sure. What are some examples of branched chain amino acids? Leucine, isoleucine, and oh no, is it valine? My dietitian instructor would tisk me for not remembering the third one, but it's three. There's 20 amino acids, and 3 of them are your branched chain, and they work specifically in the muscle. If you Google branched chain amino acids, you'll figure out the other third. But they're in everything, but they're in higher concentrations in animal protein. So it's not so much looking for where can I get leucine, it's where can I get all of the amino acids, and that's going to be in your animal protein. Is Pilates class considered resistance training? Yes, this is a good question. Pilates, like the reformer, is resistance training. Even on the mat can be a little bit of resistance training. On the mat, it's what we would consider body weight. But you're not doing a whole lot of body weight resistance. It's more, holding postures, that kind of strengthening. So it is a strengthening class. It's not so much a muscle building class. So we're strengthening the muscle we have in Pilates. We're not building a lot of muscle, with the exception of on the reformer. If you increase the resistance, like the different coils have different resistances. And if you are gradually increasing the coil and it's harder and harder to push on the bar, you are going to add some resistance there. It's not probably enough to gain a lot of muscle mass, but again, if you're starting from scratch, that you definitely will at first. You'll probably plateau eventually. My doctor said for me to take 5,000 IUs of vitamin D. That seems excessive. It might not be. Many Americans are very low in vitamin D, especially if you have any underlying condition, from metabolic disease to osteoporosis to an autoimmune condition to overweight. All of those things use vitamin D a lot. The older we get, the less we're able to create our own vitamin D. And most of us are just not in the sun. I'm gonna mute. There we go. So it might be that you had a lab test that showed you were pretty darn low, and 5,000 will bring you up. 5,000 doesn't sound crazy.
Noise that Megan muted me. I was in a web a Zoom.
The upper limit on vitamin D, I believe, is 50,000. So if that gives you a little bit of perspective. So that doesn't mean everyone needs to take 5,000, but 5,000 doesn't seem crazy if your doctor had a reason for prescribing it. We did it. And it's 1 o'clock. Okay, and we made it through all the questions. So wow, thank you for all the participation. I'm so glad this was an interesting subject. If you have other topics you want to know about, email me. If you have a question for Eric and strength training, email me, and we'll just keep doing more and more of these. And I hope to see you all soon. So have a great rest of your week and see you at the next one. Bye, everyone.